My wife cheated on me and ended up in the hospital. Her family called me heartless for wanting a divorce. Then my daughter told me something that ended any mercy I had left. I destroyed her and her side piece. Sup, Reddit. A year ago, I had a wife, a house, and a clean record. Now I've just got the house. Could be worse. Name's Jared, 38 male. Life at this age was running on autopilot. Wake up at 6, make breakfast for the kids, argue with my daughter about screen time, convince my son that yes, he really did need to brush his teeth, drive them to school, fight traffic to the plant, work for 10 hours, fight traffic home, make dinner, help with homework, collapse on the couch, repeat until death. The American dream, baby. I worked as a quality control supervisor at a manufacturing plant that made industrial valves. Riveting stuff, I know. But it paid well, came with decent benefits, and gave me enough stability to raise 2 kids and keep a roof over our heads. My wife Rebecca was 36, worked as a regional sales coordinator for a medical supply company. Lots of travel, lots of client dinners, lots of late nights at the office. I never questioned it because that's what happens when you trust someone for 15 years. You stop looking for the lies because you assume they stopped telling them. We had 2 kids. Chloe was 14. Smart kid. Too smart for her own good sometimes. She had her mother's looks and my stubbornness, which was going to make her teenage years interesting for everyone. Ian was 10. Still believed in Santa until some kid at school ruined it last December. He cried for 2 hours. I wanted to find that kid's parents and have a conversation about raising little sociopaths. Ian was the easy one, though. Give him a video game and a snack, and he'd be content for hours. The marriage wasn't perfect. Nothing is after 15 years. We argued about money, about whose turn it was to handle the parent-teacher conferences, about why she was always on her phone during dinner. She complained that I didn't communicate enough. I complained that she communicated too much with everyone except me. Normal stuff. That Tuesday morning, Rebecca told me she had a 3-day sales conference in Indianapolis. She'd done similar trips before, usually coming back with stories about boring presentations and overpriced hotel food. She packed her suitcase the night before, laid out her work clothes, set her alarm for some ungodly hour so she could beat traffic. I kissed her goodbye at the door, while the kids ate cereal in the kitchen. She smelled like that perfume I'd bought her for Christmas. Should have wondered why she was wearing it for a boring sales conference. But I didn't, because I'm a trusting idiot. I dropped the kids at school, then sat in traffic for 45 minutes listening to sports radio. Work was work. A quality issue on the production line had everyone panicking. Some gaskets were coming out of spec, which doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize those gaskets were going into valves that controlled natural gas flow. One failure could mean an explosion. So yeah, kind of a big deal. I spent 10 hours babysitting the production crew, checking measurements, rejecting about 2,000 units that would have to be scrapped, and filling out enough paperwork to kill a small forest. By the time I got home, it was almost 7, and I was running on fumes. Made spaghetti for dinner, because it was the one thing both kids would eat without complaining. We watched some superhero movie Ian picked. I sent them to bed, and settled into the couch with the kind of exhausted satisfaction that comes from surviving another day. Then my phone rang. Rebecca's mother, Janet. The woman could talk for 3 hours about nothing. Once called me to complain about the weather for 20 minutes while I was trying to handle a vendor crisis at work. So I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. The voice on the other end wasn't the usual chatty tone. It was shaking. You gotta get to the hospital. Now. Janet, slow down. What's going on? It's Rebecca. Something happened. I don't know. Just get here. Please. Then she just started sobbing in a way that made my stomach drop. I was already grabbing my keys, my brain running through every bad scenario at once. Car accident on the highway. Heart attack, though she was too young for that. Stroke. Some random attack in a hotel parking lot. Maybe a robbery gone wrong. Maybe a reckless driver. I couldn't keep up with my own thoughts. I called my brother Mike and told him to come watch the kids, that there was an emergency and I didn't have time to explain. He lived 20 minutes away but said he'd break every speed limit. That's Mike. Doesn't ask questions when it matters. The drive to the hospital was a blur of yellow lights and white knuckles. I ran at least 3 red lights that I remember, probably more that I don't. The parking lot was a maze of one-way lanes and confusing signs. I ended up leaving my car in a spot that definitely wasn't a real parking space and jogging toward the emergency entrance. Found Janet in the waiting room. Red eyes, tissue wadded up in her hands. She couldn't tell me what happened. Just kept saying Rebecca was inside, that the doctors wouldn't tell her much because she wasn't listed as primary contact, that the police had been there and asked questions she couldn't answer. Police. That word stuck in my head like a splinter I couldn't reach. The doctor who finally came to talk to me had the kind of face that had delivered bad news too many times to show much emotion anymore. She led me to a small office. She told me Rebecca had been attacked. Someone had smashed a bottle across her head and face. Multiple lacerations, some deep enough to require extensive stitching. Damage to her left eye that was still being assessed. Possible permanent scarring. Broken cheekbone on the left side. She was stable but sedated, and they were monitoring for brain swelling. Attacked? I heard myself say. She's supposed to be in Indianapolis. At a conference. The doctor paused. Her expression shifted. Mr. Ashford, your wife wasn't brought in from Indianapolis. I sat there trying to process the words. My wife was supposed to be at a sales conference 3 hours away. What kind of conference involves getting your face ripped open with broken glass? Then the doctor's voice dropped lower. She mentioned that when Rebecca was brought in, there were signs of recent sexual activity. Given the circumstances of how she was found, the location where it happened, the presence of a male suspect who fled the scene, the police had questions. I didn't understand at first. Or maybe I just didn't want to understand. The doctor was careful with her words, but the implication was clear enough. Whatever happened to Rebecca, it wasn't a random attack in some Indianapolis hotel. There was more to the story. I thanked her without knowing what I was thanking her for. She told me Rebecca was resting, that I could see her in a few hours when the sedation wore off, that the police would want to talk to her again in the morning. I walked out of that office feeling like the ground wasn't solid anymore. Janet was still crying in the waiting room. I sat down next to her and stared at the wall, my mind trying to catch up with what my gut already knew. The next 48 hours were brutal. I bounced between the hospital and home, trying to keep the kids' lives as normal as possible while mine was falling apart around me. Mike stayed at the house, handling school runs and meals, not asking questions, but clearly knowing something was very wrong. I told the kids that Mom had been in an accident, that she was hurt but would be okay, that they'd see her soon. Chloe looked at me and asked what kind of accident. I told her we'd talk about it later. Rebecca was awake by the second day, but heavily medicated. Her face was wrapped in white bandages like a mummy, only her right eye visible through the gauze. The left side of her face had taken the worst of it. The doctors said she'd need at least 3 reconstructive surgeries over the next few years, maybe more. The damage wasn't just cosmetic. It was structural. They were still running tests. I visited her room a few times, kept the conversation short and surface level. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? The doctors say the swelling is going down. That's good. I'll bring you some magazines. She tried to talk about the attack once. Started saying something about a misunderstanding, about things getting out of control, about how it wasn't what it looked like. I held up my hand and told her to rest. Not because I cared about her rest, because I wasn't ready to hear whatever lie she'd rehearsed in her medicated haze. The thing is, I'm not stupid. The inconsistencies were stacking up, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. She was supposed to be in Indianapolis. She was supposed to be at a conference, but there were no coworkers calling to check on her, no colleagues sending flowers, no boss reaching out with concern. And the way she looked at me with that one visible eye, it was the look of someone who'd been caught. Her family showed up in waves over those 2 days. Her mother practically moved into the waiting room, demanding updates from nurses who didn't have any. Her sister drove in from Ohio, looking worried but also strangely uncomfortable around me. Her brother flew in from Arizona, stood around being useless, and made comments about how we needed to stay strong as a family. None of them would look me in the eye. That's what I noticed. Every single one of them avoided direct eye contact with me, like they knew something I didn't and felt guilty about it. On the third morning, 2 detectives showed up asking to speak with Rebecca. I spotted them at the nurses' station, showing badges and speaking in low voices. One was a woman in her 40s. The other was a younger guy who mostly took notes. I watched them walk into her room from my spot in the hallway. The door closed. I stood there for almost an hour, watching nurses come and go, orderlies pushing carts, the whole routine of hospital life happening around me while I waited to find out if my marriage was what I thought it was. When they came out, they asked if we could talk privately. We went to a small conference room. The female detective closed the door and didn't waste time on small talk. Mr. Ashford, I'm going to be straight with you. Your wife wasn't attacked in Indianapolis. She was at a motel, 20 minutes from your house, place called the Pine View Motor Lodge. The words hit me square in the chest. She kept talking, but I was already doing the math. My wife had been meeting a man there. Surveillance footage from the parking lot showed them arriving together in his truck, holding hands, laughing, kissing in full view of anyone who might be watching. The detective paused to let that sink in, studying my face for a reaction. They'd been in the room for about 2 hours when something went wrong. An argument, shouting loud enough that the front desk clerk called the room to complain. Then a crash. Then silence. When nobody answered the follow-up call, the clerk went to check and found Rebecca on the floor in a pool of blood, face destroyed, broken bottle on the carpet, the man gone. I sat there trying to make sense of what she was telling me. The man's name was Garrett Keene, district manager at Rebecca's company, married with 3 kids. They'd been having an affair for at least 8 months based on credit card records and witness statements from coworkers who'd noticed things but hadn't wanted to get involved. 8 months. Every fake business trip. Every late night at the office. Every time she said she was too tired when she got home, because she'd already been somewhere else, with someone else. The detective asked if I had any questions. I had about 1,000, but couldn't form any of them into words. She gave me her card and told me they were looking for Garrett, that he'd fled the scene and hadn't been located yet. I walked out of that hospital without saying goodbye to anyone. Just kept walking until I found a bench near the parking garage and sat there watching everything around me. My wife had cheated on me for 8 months, while I was working 50-hour weeks and making spaghetti for our kids and thinking we were solid. I should have been devastated. Probably was, somewhere underneath. But the main thing I felt was cold, like something inside me had shut off and wasn't coming back on any time soon. I sat there until the sun started going down, and Mike called asking where I was, and if the kids should eat without me. I told him I'd be home soon. The next week was all about keeping it together while I figured out my next move. I played the role of concerned husband because I needed time. Time to gather evidence. Time to prepare. Time to figure out exactly how I was going to handle whatever came next. Rebecca came home 5 days after the attack. Her face was still wrapped in bandages, the left side hidden completely. The doctor said there would be permanent scarring, that she'd need multiple surgeries, that the damage was significant enough that she should prepare herself psychologically. Whatever beauty she'd had was gone, shattered by the same bottle her boyfriend had used when she tried to end things. I helped her get settled in the guest bedroom. That was my first move. Not our bedroom. The guest bedroom on the opposite side of the house from the kids. She noticed but didn't say anything. Probably thought I was being considerate of her recovery needs. Let her think that. Her family was everywhere. Janet moved into our house like she owned the place, rearranging my kitchen according to some system only she understood. Made suggestions about meal planning that implied I'd been feeding the kids garbage for years. Every morning she'd have some new complaint about how the house was run. Her sister slept on the couch and watched me like a hawk. Every time I came out of my study late at night, she'd be there pretending to read a magazine, asking if everything was okay. Her brother tried to have man-to-man talks with me about marriage and forgiveness. The guy had been divorced twice. His second wife got a restraining order. But sure, let's take relationship advice from him. He cornered me in the garage one evening while I was pretending to look for a tool. Look, I know this is rough, but Rebecca needs you right now. She almost died, man. I kept my back to him, staring at the pegboard. She almost died in a motel room with another dude. People mess up. Marriages get through worse than this. I turned around and looked him dead in the eyes. Yours didn't. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked back inside without another word. Didn't try to lecture me again after that. I smiled through the rest of it, nodded at the right moments, said the right things about healing and support and taking it one day at a time, played the role so well that even I almost believed it sometimes. But every night after everyone was asleep, after the house went quiet, I was in my study building a case that would burn everything down. I went through Rebecca's laptop while she was knocked out on pain meds, found the secondary email account she'd been using to communicate with Garrett. The password was saved in her browser. 8 months of messages. Every single one made me want to puke. Pet names that made my skin crawl. Inside jokes. Plans for their next meetup at the motel. Photos I had to close immediately. Videos I didn't even open. She'd been living a whole parallel existence where she was apparently happy and fulfilled and completely unburdened by guilt. The credit card statements told their own story. A lingerie store I'd never heard of. A jewelry boutique that definitely wasn't for anything she'd worn around me. Weekend getaways disguised as work retreats. Dinners at restaurants we couldn't afford because I was saving for the kids' college funds. All of it funneled through our joint account while I worked overtime to build our savings like the world's most oblivious fool. My buddy Bruce worked in insurance fraud investigation, the kind of job where you spend your days tracking down liars and documenting their deception. I called him and explained the situation without going into too much detail. He didn't ask questions, just told me to send him what I had and give him a few days. He came back with more than I expected. Phone records showing calls and texts to Garrett at all hours. Late-night conversations that sometimes lasted 2 or 3 hours while I was sleeping down the hall. GPS data from the family phone plan showing exactly where Rebecca had been every time she claimed to be somewhere else. She'd developed a whole routine around betraying me. I printed everything, organized it into a folder, put it in a locked drawer in my study where nobody would find it. The kids knew something was wrong. Chloe asked me once why I was sleeping in my study instead of with Mom. I told her Mom needed rest and I didn't want to disturb her. She looked at me with those eyes that saw too much and nodded like she didn't believe me but wasn't going to push. Ian was easier to manage. He just wanted things to be normal. So I made things feel normal for him. Same routines, same bedtimes, same snacks after school. 2 weeks after Rebecca came home, her family finally left. Janet made a big production of it, hugging everyone and promising to call every day and giving me a pointed look that suggested I'd better step up now that she wasn't there to supervise. I smiled and said I'd take good care of her daughter. The house was quiet after they left. Rebecca was still in the guest room, still bandaged, still trying to catch my eye and start conversations I wasn't interested in having. She tried apologies that I cut off, tried explanations that I walked away from. She was getting frustrated, I could tell. Good. But something was holding me back from confronting her. A gut feeling that there was more to find out. Turns out, I was right. It happened on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after Rebecca came home. The kids were supposed to be in bed. Rebecca was in the guest room. I was in my study going through the evidence folder again, looking for anything I might have missed. There was a soft knock on the door. Hesitant. Chloe was standing there in her pajamas. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for a while. Something about the way she was standing there made my stomach drop. She asked if she could talk to me about something important. Something she should have told me a long time ago. I pulled up a chair next to mine and she sat down without meeting my eyes. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then she started talking. She told me that Garrett had come to our house. Last April, while I was on a work trip to the Cleveland plant. Rebecca had told the kids he was a colleague who needed to pick up some important documents. He'd stayed for a few hours. Longer than necessary, but Chloe hadn't thought much about it at the time. She'd been doing homework in her room when he came in without knocking. Said he was looking for the bathroom. But he didn't leave. I'm not going to repeat what she told me next. I can't. But I'll say this. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to put my fist through the wall while my daughter described what that man did to her while her mother was downstairs knowing he was in our house. When she finished, her voice had gone flat and empty. I asked her gently if she'd told anyone about it before. She nodded, started crying. She'd told her mother. The very next day, as soon as she could get Rebecca alone. What did she say? My voice came out rough, barely controlled. She said I was confused, that Garrett would never do something like that. She said if I told anyone, it would mess everything up. She said that to you. She made me promise not to tell you, Dad. She said it would blow up our whole family. Her voice cracked. I sat there for a long moment, boiling. My wife hadn't just cheated on me. She'd covered up what that man did to our daughter, chosen her affair over our child, let him keep coming to our house, kept meeting him at that motel, while our daughter carried that weight alone for months. I hugged Chloe for a long time, told her none of this was her fault, told her she was the bravest kid I knew for finally telling me, told her I was going to fix it, that Garrett was going to pay for what he did. Then I walked her back to her room, made sure she was okay, and told her to try to get some sleep. I spent the rest of the night staring at the wall, planning exactly how I was going to destroy everyone responsible. The war was about to start. The next morning, I called my lawyer before the sun was fully up, told him everything, the affair, the attack, and what Garrett had done to Chloe. The line went silent for a long moment. Then he started talking about next steps, criminal charges, protective orders, a divorce strategy that would leave Rebecca with nothing. Then I called the detective who'd given me her card at the hospital, told her there was new information about Garrett Keene, information that changed everything about how they should be looking for him. She listened without interrupting, asked questions. When I finished, she said they'd escalate the search, add charges to the warrant. Based on what Chloe had told me, charges that would ensure Garrett Keene never walked free again. I spent the next 2 weeks running on pure, focused anger. By day, I went through the motions of normal life, dropped the kids at school, went to work, handled problems on the production line, came home, made dinner, helped with homework. By night, I added to the evidence folder, documented everything, prepared for the war I was about to wage. Rebecca tried to talk to me several times. Started with tearful apologies that I shut down with one look. Moved on to explanations about how Garrett had manipulated her, pressured her, made her feel things she couldn't control. I listened to all of it with a blank face, letting her dig her own grave with every word. She never mentioned Chloe, never acknowledged what she'd covered up. Either she didn't know Chloe had told me, or she was gambling that she could keep that secret buried forever. Either way, it just added fuel to the fire I was building. 2.5 weeks after I learned the full truth, the police called. They'd found Garrett. He'd been hiding at his brother's hunting cabin 4 hours north, probably thinking he could wait out the heat and slip away somewhere nobody knew his name. They arrested him on a Thursday morning. I found out that afternoon. I should have let the system handle it. Should have trusted the courts, the lawyers, the whole machinery of justice to do what it was supposed to do. That would have been the smart play, the mature response. But when I thought about what he'd done to Chloe, what he'd done to my family, something took over that didn't care about being smart or mature. I told Mike I needed him to watch the kids for the night. Didn't tell him why. He looked at me for a long moment, reading something in my face, then just nodded. I drove to the county jail where Garrett was being held pending arraignment. His family had posted bail around 4:30 that afternoon. 100,000, which meant they'd put up property as collateral. But jail releases take forever. Paperwork, processing, inventory of personal items. I sat in the parking lot across from the release exit for over 3 hours, watching the doors, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Important detail here. The bail was set before the detective called me back about the upgraded charges related to Chloe. The original warrant was just for the assault on Rebecca. The other charges hadn't been filed yet. So technically, Garrett was walking out on bail for beating my wife with a bottle. The stuff about my daughter was still working its way through the system. It was almost 8 when the release door finally opened. Garrett stepped out into the vestibule area, that little covered section between the building and the parking lot where they let you collect yourself before facing the world. There were cameras everywhere. I knew that. A deputy was holding the door. A couple other people were milling around, probably family members waiting for their own releases. He was carrying a clear plastic bag with his wallet and keys and whatever else they'd taken from him during booking. His eyes scanned the parking lot, probably looking for whoever was picking him up. Then he saw me. I was already walking toward him. Not running, just walking. The recognition hit his face, then confusion, then something that might have been fear. Hey, hold on. He held up one hand, the other clutching his property bag. Look, I get that you're mad, but just let me... You touched my daughter. His face went white. Whatever excuse he'd been cooking up died right there. I didn't give him a chance to find another one. The first punch caught him square in the nose. I felt cartilage crunch, saw blood spray. He stumbled backward, hands coming up too late. The second punch split his lip against his teeth. He was already falling when I hit him a third time, this one glancing off his cheekbone as he went down. He hit the concrete hard. The back of his head bounced off the curb. That's where most of the real damage came from, that impact with the concrete. His face had already taken 3 solid punches, but when his cheek hit that curb, I heard something crack. I got one more punch in, maybe 2, before hands grabbed me from behind. The deputy who'd been holding the door, big guy, moved fast. He had me on the ground with my arm twisted behind my back before I could process what was happening. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 seconds. They cuffed me right there in the vestibule, cameras recording everything, witnesses gaping, Garrett groaning on the ground with blood pooling under his face. My right hand was throbbing, knuckles split, wrist already starting to swell. Didn't care. I spent the night in holding. Same jail where Garrett had just been released from. They processed me, took my statement, gave me a phone call. I called Mike, told him what happened. He said he'd be there first thing in the morning. The charges came down the next day. Assault in the 2nd degree. Could have been worse. Could have been aggravated assault if the prosecutor wanted to push it. Garrett's injuries were significant, but not life-threatening. Broken nose, split lip, 2 teeth knocked loose, orbital fracture on the left side from where his face met the curb. The prosecutor looked at my case and looked at Garrett's case and saw the whole picture. Clean record for me. 38 years without so much as a speeding ticket. Full cooperation with the arrest. No flight risk. And on the other side, a man who'd assaulted my wife and done worse to my daughter. My lawyer worked out a plea. Assault in the 3rd degree, reduced from 2nd. 18 months probation. 80 hours of community service. Court-ordered anger management. 12 sessions. Restitution for Garrett's medical bills, which came to about $4,000. No jail time beyond the night I'd already served. The judge who accepted the plea looked at me over his glasses and said he understood why I'd done what I did, But he also said the law doesn't allow for vigilante justice, no matter how justified it might feel. Said I was lucky it wasn't worse. I accepted the deal and signed the paperwork. My hand still hurt from the punches. Worth every bit of pain. Because the real punishment for Garrett wasn't going to come from me hitting him in a jail vestibule. It was going to come from everything that happened next. The divorce proceedings began 3 weeks later. Garrett was out of the hospital by then, his face held together with plates and screws, looking at a long recovery and a longer list of criminal charges now that the investigation into Chloe's assault had caught up with the original warrant. Rebecca hired a lawyer who tried to paint me as an abusive husband, guy named Harlan with slicked back hair. He argued that my violent tendencies had created a toxic home environment, that Rebecca had been driven into another man's arms by my emotional unavailability, that my attack on Garrett proved I was dangerous and unstable. My lawyer destroyed him. We presented the evidence. 8 months of hotel receipts, itemized and dated. Credit card statements. GPS logs with timestamps proving every single lie she'd told. The whole thing. We showed that Rebecca had spent over $12,000 of marital funds on her affair. $12,000 that should have gone to our kids' education, our retirement, our future. But the thing that really sealed it was Chloe's statement, presented in a sealed proceeding to protect her identity, read by a court-appointed advocate since Chloe was too young to testify directly in family court. Every word of it devastating. Harlan tried to object. Your Honor, this is prejudicial and has nothing to do with dividing assets. Sit down, counselor. The judge didn't even look at him. I've heard enough. The judge looked at Rebecca like she was something he'd scraped off his shoe. When he delivered the ruling, his voice was flat and final. Full custody of both children, with Rebecca getting supervised visitation only if and when a court-appointed therapist determined the children were ready. The house was mine. My retirement accounts were protected. I got 80% of our savings. Rebecca got her personal belongings, her car, and exactly $5,000, which her lawyer had argued was necessary for her to establish independent housing. 15 years of marriage, and she walked away with barely enough to cover first and last month's rent. She tried to appeal. Harlan filed motions arguing the settlement was unconscionable, that the judge had shown bias, that Rebecca's injuries should have been taken into account as mitigating circumstances. Every motion was denied. Eventually, Harlan stopped returning her calls. Garrett's trial lasted 3 days. His defense attorney tried to argue that the assault on Chloe was a he-said-she-said situation, that there was no physical evidence, that my daughter might be confused or seeking attention. I had to leave the courtroom during that part because I was afraid of what I might do if I had to listen to more of it. The jury didn't buy any of it. 12 people looked at the evidence, listened to the testimony, and came back with a verdict in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. 22 years. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. 12 for the assault, 10 consecutive for the abuse of a minor. You'll be eligible for parole in 15 years, Mr. Keene. I suggest you use that time to think about what you've done. Garrett's face went slack. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. His mother started crying somewhere in the gallery. His wife had already divorced him by then, filed the papers within a week of his arrest, took the kids and vanished to somewhere out of state, started over with a new name and a story that probably didn't include the part about her ex-husband being a monster. Can't say I blamed her. She was a victim too, in her own way. I was in the courtroom when they let him out in cuffs. He looked at me once through the glass partition as they took him away. I smiled at him, just a little, just enough to make sure he saw it. Rebecca's life fell apart fast after the divorce. Lost her job within 2 months. The surgeries for her face were only partially covered by insurance, and the bills stacked up. Her family helped at first, but money runs out. Patience runs out. By the time the leaves changed that fall, she was living with her mother, working part-time at a drugstore, barely getting by. Her face never fully healed. The scars pulled at her features, left her looking like someone who'd lost a fight with a windshield. The doctors said more surgery might help. She couldn't afford it. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was starting to feel like myself again. Chloe was seeing a counselor she actually trusted. She smiled sometimes. Real smiles. Not the fake ones she'd been wearing for months. She even started talking about trying out for the school play. Baby steps, but steps forward. Ian had adjusted with the resilience only kids can manage. He knew Mom had done something bad. He knew Dad was taking care of things. For now, that was enough explanation. I'd settled into a routine that felt sustainable. Work, kids, gym, sleep. Weekends with Mike, grilling on the patio, watching games, doing the normal stuff that had somehow become precious. The house was different. New paint in most rooms. New furniture. New everything in the master bedroom. I'd wiped Rebecca's presents from the walls, the shelves, the entire space. I was on the back porch one Saturday evening, watching Ian throw a ball for the neighbor's dog while Chloe pretended to read. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text was from Rebecca. New number since I'd blocked her old one. 4 words. We need to talk. I should have ignored it. Should have deleted it and moved on with my evening. But something made me respond. Maybe wanting to finally close the book on this. Maybe just curiosity about how far she'd fallen. She showed up the next afternoon while the kids were at Mike's. I watched her car pull into the driveway, watched her sit there for a full minute working up courage. When she finally got out, I saw what the months had done to her. The surgeries had helped some, but not enough. Her left eye drooped, the eyelid not tracking right. A thick scar ran from her temple to her jaw, puckered and shiny. Another twisted the corner of her mouth into a permanent half-grimace. She tried to cover it with makeup. It didn't work. She looked like exactly what she was. The outside finally matched the inside. I didn't invite her in, just stood in the doorway. She started with apologies. Said she'd had time to think. Said she understood now how wrong she'd been. Said she was working on herself, trying to become a better person. Said she wanted a relationship with the kids, even if we could never be anything again. I let her talk, let her get through whatever speech she'd rehearsed in her car. Then she got to Chloe. I know I let her down. I know I should have believed her. I was scared, and Garrett told me she was making it up, and I wanted to believe him because you loved him more than you loved her. That's not true. You picked him over your own daughter. That's all that matters. She started crying. That messed up face looked even worse when she cried, Please, I'll do anything. Just tell me what to do. I looked at her for a long moment, at the scars, at the drooping eye, at what was left of the woman I'd married. There's nothing you can do. You made your choice. Now you gotta live with it. I stepped back and started closing the door. Wait, her hand shot out. The kids! Can I at least, when they're ready? If they're ever ready, that's up to them now. She stood there for a long moment, her face wet with tears, looking at me for any crack in the wall, any sign of the husband who'd loved her once, any hope that things could be different. She didn't find anything. She walked back to her car slowly, shoulders hunched, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I watched her drive away and felt nothing but relief. Then I went inside, made a sandwich, and called Mike to see how the kids were doing. The sun went down, the house got quiet, and somewhere out there, Rebecca was driving back to whatever life she'd managed to scrape together. That night, after the kids were home and in bed, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee. My wife cheated on me and ended up in the hospital. Everyone asked me to forgive her. My decision to leave her was irrevocable. Looking at where I am versus where she ended up, I know I made the right call. Some bridges don't get rebuilt. Some people don't get second chances. And some men don't forgive. I'm one of them. And I sleep just fine at night. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.